If you struggle with making epic and impactful landscape photos because you can't travel to foreign and dramatic landscapes, this easy to follow 5-step video will surely help you out. The first step is to research and explore your local neighborhood. I know this sounds boring and has nothing to do with actual photography, but hear me out before clicking away. Actually, almost everything that makes a photo good has nothing to do with your camera. Yes, I said it. I'm sorry to burst your hopes of just throwing money at the problem. It's all the essential things you do before actually clicking the shutter button that makes a great photo, and then some post-processing. Once you realize this, landscape photography actually becomes relatively easy. Of course, you need to learn the basics of using a camera, but for this video I'll assume you already know that. If not, I have a video in the upper right corner that covers all that. So the first step to take absolutely epic photos in your local neighborhood is to research and explore it. You can do this in many different ways, and I'll cover a few here. First off, locate points of interest. As I always say when talking about composition, you want some kind of subject, focal point or concept. Lighthouses, mills, lone trees, a mountain if you live close to one, waterfalls, rivers, an animal, or some kind of abstract pattern. The subject doesn't have to be epic in itself, but it's important it stands out in the terrain so you have a clear focal point. You can always use Google to start your search, and here it's important that you use your local language. The chance that some young American influencer has written a blog post with photos about my local forests and what to photograph in there is not big. However, the chance of some local person who has a particular interest for special trees has done so and added a few photos is significantly higher. Look for information outside the sphere of landscape photography, and you'll be surprised what information you can find via Google if you use the right keywords. I usually use this method if I'm on the lookout for something specific, like where to find oak trees in Denmark. So since we are talking about local landscapes, there may not be a whole lot of other photographers around who've done the research job for you. So when I use Instagram for research, I find some local hikers or nature lovers and see what they have visited. Most cities, towns and counties also has some kind of official Instagram page with what's of interest in the local area. They may also have a hashtag for regular people to use, and once you've sorted through all the selfies, you may find something natural to photograph. Many people also upload landscape photos or photos of landmarks to Google Maps and Google Earth, which makes them fantastic tools for research. I cannot count how many points of interest I've found simply by the use of dog walkers documenting their morning route on Google Maps. It's astounding. You can use Google Earth for the same. Here you can be a bit more selective about the visible layers, and the photos may also vary from what you find on Google Maps. Finally, the best thing to do is actually getting out. Yes, boo-hoo. I know this is what most landscape photographers dread. Despite us actually saying we love being in nature, actually doing the legwork. If you don't own a car, maybe use a bike and drive through your countryside, and else just visit and walk all the small footpaths and trails you can find. I have learned over the years I shouldn't be too picky with the specific landscape I choose to go for a walk. There are usually always interesting compositions to be found I wouldn't have had a chance researching from home. No matter if I walk in a forest, along a country road, next to a lake, or in a rural area, it's just about getting out. This video is also a response to my most popular video in over a year, 5 steps to take epic photos with any lens, where I stated, although not exclusively, that it is much easier to take epic photos in epic landscapes. The inevitable response was of course how to take epic photos in your own backyard. So whether you live in Yosemite Valley or in central Germany or a random place in England, this video is for you. There is of course also much more to say, but keeping it simple for the sake of YouTube, your time and attention span, I'll keep this to 5 steps to take absolutely epic photos in your local neighborhood. So let's get on to step 2. Step 2 only requires patience, which in itself can actually be rather hard, but at least you don't need a particular set of skills. You need to wait for epic conditions. So what do I mean by this? Hurricanes, tornadoes, and mesocyclones are all epic. But if you live in a moderately boring and safe country like Denmark without weathery dangers like that, you'll have to settle with storm clouds, epic light, and favorably a combination of those two. If your subject isn't epic, you'll have to make sure other aspects of your photos are. It's really that simple. Now, there are of course other types of interesting conditions that under certain circumstances can count as epic. A cloud inversion, like in this example, could be such a phenomenon. It does require you to get up above it, and since we are not all living in the Alps or the Lake District, and an inversion looks like this from the ground level, we can't all benefit from it. Although this photo is beautiful, I wouldn't classify it as epic. So when defining what epic conditions are, we are probably thinking of something dramatic, grand, or larger than life. And that's exactly also what you can find at night. The Milky Way definitely makes for a larger than life subject, and likewise does Northern Lights. But hey Mads, you may say, a good display of Northern Lights isn't realistic where I live. Well, neither thought I before I actually experienced it, and going into Solar Maximum over the next years, the chance of a great display of Northern Lights will definitely increase. One of the hardest aspects of making epic photos locally is composing them. In dramatic landscapes with mountains, waterfalls, valleys and so on, landscapes kinda do the job for you. In flatter landscapes it's relatively easy to make more minimalist photos, simply because the landscapes are more minimal. For creating that epic vibe to a photo in a relatively boring landscape, you really need to work for it. One thing you can do is using a wide-angle lens to really emphasize whatever foreground you have found and make it jump out of the frame and into the face of the viewer. This creates a relatively dramatic 3D effect which can enhance the epic feeling despite the landscape not being particularly epic. The longer focal lengths also work great. As with all scenes, you still want to build it up with depth and layers, and that can be somewhat of a challenge in less dynamic landscapes. Given you have access to one or more hills, you can play around with scale and perspective compression. One approach could be to climb the bigger of the two hills and place a person on the other hill. The person doesn't have to be on top of the other hill, but what you are after is that the person in the landscape stands out on the background, and use the long lens to zoom in and crop your field of view as to fill the frame with what's of interest. Cropping the photo just beneath the horizon usually gives a great sense of the background continuing forever and being larger than it really is. If you're out in the longer end of the telephoto range, you can also utilize the moon and the sun, making them appear much larger than what we are used to seeing. This example is great as the sun is big in the frame, and the unruly waves and the foreground in combination with the seagulls adds the necessary drama for me to interpret this photo as epic. Some of you may complain that you live in a city, and I'm sorry, I can't solve that one for you. You really only have 3 options dealing with that. Either get out of the city, find a park or botanical garden in the city, or do cityscape photography. Luckily, cityscape photography uses the same compositional tools as landscape photography. And whether you do local landscape photography or in foreign epic mountains, it's still the same compositional tools you use. Besides the tools I've already mentioned, a few more to remember are balance, utilizing leading lines, and repeating patterns. I cover these and many more compositional tools in my 2 ebooks on composition in landscape photography. Both ebooks are easy to read with minimal text and loads of examples. You can always try the 2 free light versions first and then buy the full versions if your interest has been piqued. There are links to all of them in the description of the video. Now that we have a subject, some epic conditions, and have our composition, the really hard part of landscape photography begins. Whether you are into epic photos or comp photos, it's putting all these ingredients together and achieve, in lack of better words, the X factor of the landscape photo. That one thing that makes it a bit more interesting. I definitely don't always succeed in this, but it is certainly an aspect of landscape photography I've become aware of. Especially since 2019 and 2020, when photographing my local landscapes became more relevant, and as they usually lack that sense of awe which epic landscapes are so good at delivering. The X factor is usually something simple like birds flying above a boat, fog separating the layers of the landscape, hoarfrost hanging from trees, landscape patterns you usually do not see from the ground, having the lighthouse actually lighting, showing special moments like Comet Neowise, a storm front, a red rainbow, or a shipwreck along an otherwise boring beach, and so on. Like this photo is not just trees sticking out of the fog. It's the sunrise light interacting with the trees, throwing shadows towards us. This is not just a lighthouse, it's a lighthouse in a snowstorm. This is not just a sea stack, it's a sea stack with waves showing a sense of movement. And this is not just a pack of birds flying above a lake, it's a pack of birds flying above a lake, perfectly caught between 2 trees in the exact moment when the fog dissipates and the light breaks through, making the 2 trees catch long shadows. So it is the combination of all these ingredients that come together and make for an interesting local landscape photo. And it's of course also getting out into your local landscapes and taking these photos that creates memories that are worth preserving. So a big thank you to SAAL Digital for sponsoring this week's video. This year is my brand new personal favorites 2020 photography book. So as you have seen with my other videos sponsored by SAAL Digital, again, a big thank you to them. These books are just phenomenal. And I really think that especially 2020, when we remember back at it, was a year where many of us really had to start focusing on photographing our own home country. Obviously, these are from Iceland from the very beginning, but as you can see here, this here is Denmark. This is, by the way, in the video where I show how to take photos of myself from a distance. But we were really forced, many of us, to photograph our own local landscapes in this year. And I would say like my own personal photography really exploded, and I would say improved from photographing my local landscapes, because I can so much more relate to these landscapes because I've grown up in them. And both documenting them, photographing them, making them into art is just such a meaningful experience. So this specific book here is SAAL Digital's professional line. You can either use it, drag and drop your photos that are your favorite photos to show them off. You can make it as a portfolio. You can make it to create memories. It's a very easy drag and drop system in the SAAL Digital software. You can also use their templates. And as you can see, the quality is really outstanding here. You don't even need ICC profiles. Personally, I would say that you definitely need to check your photos on many different monitors just to see that they averagely look good. And then for my sake, I wouldn't need the ICC profiles. But if you want to add ICC profiles for your prints, you can definitely do that too. So as you can see here, just photos from Denmark and a lot from my local landscapes. So if you want to make a photography book like this yourself, I would highly appreciate if you would use the links down in the description of this video. There's a US link, a Great Britain link, and a EU link. They do ship worldwide, but I would highly appreciate that, because then SAAL Digital can see that traffic comes through me, and else there's no reason for them to sponsor me if there's not. So this is how it works on YouTube videos. Hopefully I have inspired you a little bit to get your own photography book made. It is so satisfactory. And now let's continue with the fifth step. I have already covered some basic editing tips for making epic photos in my 5 steps to take epic landscape photos with any lens video that are worth watching, as they're just as relevant for your local neighborhood epic photos. What I do find to be extra important for the theme of this video is to really bring out the details of the clouds you catch and maybe make them darker for dramatic purposes. You can use various masks like the Sky Selection tool, Linear Gradient or Radial Gradient in both Adobe Camera Raw and Lightroom to select either the entire sky or parts of it and add contrast. Just be absolutely aware of the borders of your selection, as they can get to look very odd if you overdo the effects. Although the masking tool in both ACR and Lightroom has come a long way, I most often prefer to do this process with luminosity masks in Photoshop. Whether you use the RAW editor or Photoshop, the common factor for bringing out the details in the clouds is to not just darken them with the exposure slider. You want to add contrast for the details to become more visible. It's the difference between dark areas and light areas that makes details and texture more visible. The dark part of the clouds should be darker, but the highlights of the sky should be preserved. It's usually a bit of a balancing act between the different sliders. If you personally don't mind replacing skies, that's of course also an option. Besides working the sky, you can use the same tools to add contrast to the ground. If the ground seems a bit flat, I often darken it with the exposure slider and then use the white slider to bring the highlights back up. It doesn't always work, but it's an easy way to dodge and burn your photos. And if you want to learn all my editing techniques and fully realize the potential in your epic photos, there's a link and a coupon code in the description of the video where you can get $45 off when enrolling in my huge 30+ videos from beginner to advanced post-processing course, Photoshop for landscape photographers. The course is designed in a way so you can use either Camera Raw or Lightroom as your RAW converter and then finish up in Photoshop or bring the photo back to Lightroom. Be sure to check out the links in the description of the video for the photography books, for the ebooks, and if you want to enroll in my Photoshop for Landscape Photographers post-processing course, use the coupon code. As always, everything is in the description of the video. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned a little. See you next time.